Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, Technical Evangelist at CTC, and today we're going to talk about how to clean up your Revit library using some of our CTC Express tools. We're going to be focusing primarily on the BIM Manager Suite. As always, by the way, these webinars are recorded. They will be uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly after, and also, as always, if or when you have questions throughout today's discussion, I encourage you to throw them in the questions window, and I will do my best to answer them in line when it relates to the tool. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This whole process of cleaning up and repairing our Revit family library. And the real problem that we all run into here is that the process of doing that can be very time-consuming, very, very time-consuming. Manually opening up these families, checking them, making sure they comply with your standards, making them comply with your standards. This can take months, sometimes more than a year, depending on how much content you have. And the more involved your content is, the more tricky this process can be. If you decide to change your mind on a standard, my goodness, it's really painful, because all Revit stuff is all kind of bound together by the same base standards. And so when you change your mind, you have to change a lot of stuff. Schedules, family content, shared parameters, potentially tags. There's a lot of things. And so I'm going to show you today how the BIM Manager Suite can really save you tons and tons of time in this maintenance process. Standard establishment in the first place, and also fixing things and changing your mind on standards later. I mean, we've all got better things to do with our time than manually opening and repairing family content. So what I want to do is take you through this process. And we're going to cover a couple of things. One is just the concepts initially in planning for quality family standards, what it is you have to consider. We're going to talk about how to establish consistent shared parameters that you can use, a single source of truth, the foundation of all of your data being those shared parameters, and how you can get that to a sustainable environment. We're going to talk about how to automate the correction of the families themselves in relation to those shared parameters, and possibly formulas and values and groupings of parameters and things like that. We're going to talk about automating all of that tedium. And then we're also going to talk about how to very easily repair your schedules, whether that be in a template file, whether that be in a warehousing file where you keep all of your typical schedules, or whether that be in active projects. We're going to take a look at how you can very easily repair schedules without playing the whole parameter roulette game. So really, like, the planning process for your quality family standards is effectively those three major things. You have to have good shared parameter standards that you know, that you feel good about. That's the one consistent source of truth. That's the key. One shared parameter file. See, I see a lot of companies who have multiple shared parameter files, whether it be one per discipline or one per office, things like that. Now, sometimes having more than one shared parameter file is unavoidable. If you've got a client who's demanding specific standards, you may very well have to use their shared parameter file, but in an isolated library. On your main corporate library, ideally, you would have one shared parameter file. Now, it's also meaningful to understand that sometimes you have to have multiple languages involved. And as soon as you change a parameter name to be language specific, that means new GUID, that means, new parameter and new file. So that can be a little tricky there. So you do try to, however, you need to try to have consistent shared parameter standards. One, ideally, per company, but again, you may have to make considerations for language, but certainly not discipline-specific shared parameter files, plural. That's not a good idea. You should have one for all disciplines, all-encompassing in one with consistent naming conventions. I'm going to show you today how you can do that with the Shared Parameter Manager tool that we have built. Then all of your content should be based on that as well, on that single source of truth. And so I'm going to show you how you can automate that process. But you need to understand what those parameters are now, what you have, and what you want them to be. And then you can go through the process of correcting your library. It's a part of the planning process, is understanding what you have. And then finally, just making sure that everything's all in line, specifically your schedules for sure, just making sure that you understand what impacts your parameter changes in that first step might have on your schedules. So you know what? I've been talking a lot on the same slide. Let's jump into Revit directly and take a look at what this looks like in the Revit environment, okay? Now, I'm going to be focusing nearly entirely today on the BIM Manager Suite. There's one tool I'm going to talk about outside of the BIM Manager Suite. Actually, I'll talk about two tools outside. One from the Batch Suite, it's a free tool, and one from the Project Suite over here. But primarily, I'm going to focus on this cleanup process, this maintaining your library and establishing your standards process right here on the BIM Manager Suite, the tools that are in blue here. There's three tools in particular that I'm going to be demonstrating today throughout this process. The Shared Parameter Manager, this is the one that lets you actually establish and maintain your shared parameter file. The Family Processor, currently in gray because I'm not in a family right now, I'm in a project file, but this will light up in a minute here when I get into a family. This is what I'm going to use to repair my family content. And then the Schedule Parameter Resolver. Those three tools are the three that I'm going to use in today's discussion. There certainly are other tools that can get brought into this mix depending on what your specific needs are, but these are the three core tools that pretty much every company out there has some need of in some form to maintain and manage your standards for families. Okay, the first tool I'm going to talk about here is the Shared Parameter Manager. We're going to talk about getting to a single shared parameter file and some of the decision-making process you might need to do. So with the Shared Parameter Manager, when I click on that tool and open it up, this tool here allows me to browse for a shared parameter file, singular, ideally. And when I browse for this, I have my CTC standard sort of shared parameters file right here. This file, when I open this up, it has some groupings. It has some parameters inside those groupings, some of which are fantastic, and I like the names, some of which are not so fantastic, and I really don't like the names. One of the things that you can do just from your single shared parameter point of view is you can change your filtration up here to understand some things that may have, this is not guaranteed depending on your standards, but may be considered naming issues. When you highlight this, this will show you things that maybe aren't title cased, where the first letter of each word is capitalized, or it'll show you things that maybe have mathematical characters in the parameter name, something that's not necessarily forbidden, but it's not necessarily a best practice. I try to avoid that if I can because it makes formulas later on a bit more complicated. So I like to not have mathematical characters in my parameter names. And the nice thing here with this filtration is that you can force this to only show you things that have those problems. So I can see I've got things like 1-1/2, so it's 1.5 something with a hyphen inside there, another minus sign. There's a lot of things like this in this file. Right down here, I've got some issues where I don't have spaces in some names, but I do in others. This tool is not perfect. It finds things like and of that I probably would want to be lowercase, and it highlights those as a potential naming issue, and I can ignore those. But things like these where there aren't spaces, where I really want spaces, you know what? I have an easy fix for this. I'm going to go here and do a find and replace on these parameters so I can correct this very quickly. When I do find and replace, I'm going to do this in sort of two steps. I'm going to find of my selection, I've got 6 parameters selected. Of my selection, I'm going to find those that have the word depth because I can see that there's no space before or after depth. And there's a similar deal here with thickness. There's no space before or after the word thickness. And I really want spaces in here. Frame, space, depth, space, 1. Frame, space, thickness, space, 1. Something like that. So I'm going to find depth, and I'm going to replace that with space, depth, space. I'm going to preview that just to kind of see what this is going to look like. And you notice here, instead of me needing to one by one manually change this, which I could do if I really wanted to, but instead of doing this one by one, it's going to show me what it's going to do. It's going to change these things. And if I apply that, it's going to say a new GUID, Global Unique Identifier, will be assigned to each of these parameters. What it basically does in the background is it grabs all the properties of this, it deletes the old one, and it makes a brand new parameter with the same name, new name, same properties, and now a new GUID. It's effectively a new parameter. It's the same thing you would do manually if you were making this change. You'd have to delete this by hand and then make a new parameter called frame space depth space 1 with probably length type of parameter and probably grouped here in the dimensions grouping, right? You'd be doing that all by hand. This thing, when I do a rename, it does all of that for me, in this case for all 3 parameters. So when I say yes, continue, I get 3 brand new parameters. They've been renamed. They look like they're renamed to me, but in the shared parameter environment, it's actually a new parameter. I'm gonna do the same thing here for thickness. Thickness, change out depth here to thickness. I'm gonna preview those changes. Oh, fantastic. Correct names here, it's all well and good. I hit apply, new GUIDs, I'm done. I've renamed 3 more parameters, right? This process becomes super simple for fixing things. If there was something I wanted to change myself, so if I only show these again and I scroll back down, let's take a look here. Yep, those frame ones are out of the list. Panel still has some issues here, panel depth and panel width. I can do a manual fix of this if I really want to. I can double click on this and I can modify this, panel depth 1. I could change the unit type if I cared to. These are things that out of the box you can't do unless you, again, delete and recreate from scratch. I can do all these changes, add a tooltip, make it visible or not, all the things you might want to do. You can correct this, and if you make a change, like the name, or the discipline, or the parameter type, or the category, if you make a change like that, it will give a new GUID. If you just change the grouping, or whether it's visible or not, that doesn't actually require a new GUID, and this tool knows that and can help you with this process. But it helps you edit your shared parameter file safely. So I fixed that one, I'm good to go, right? Now, what happens if you end up with more than one shared parameter file? That happens more than you might want to believe it happens. So what do you do when that's the case? Well, what you can do over here to the right is you can get some other shared parameter file that might be problematic. Let's browse for this. I'm going to go find, I have out here in my C drive some extra shared parameters that came from other sources, like this guy here, Superdoor parameters. This came from a pack that we have. And maybe I want to incorporate these parameters into my shared parameter file standard. Let's just see how divergent it actually is. I can show things like conflicting parameters. And I can, again, isolate this to only show conflicting parameters. Now, what this is telling me about the conflict in this case is that the names are exactly the same. And it looks like, because of the message that's popping up, the data types are the same, but the GUID, the global unique identifier, is different, right? And so it's just telling me here that the GUIDs are different between the 2 files, even though the names themselves are the same. This one here, panel material, yep, even the data type is the same because it's not saying, it would say the GUID and data type are different potentially, if that was the case. But I can understand now what is sort of pseudo duplicated between my 2 files. Some of my content may be based on these, some may be based on these, and depending on which one it's based on will determine if it does or if it does not show up in my schedule. But I want these to all show up in my schedule. And since most of my library is based on this, I'm going to bring this across to my shared parameter file. In fact, I'm going to go through here. I'm going to delete the parameters that I know to be conflicting. So I'm just going to highlight these across multiple groups real easily, and I'm going to delete them. Go ahead and say yes here. The comparisons rerun, and I understand now that there's only one conflicting parameter in here, existing. I'm going to right-click and delete this guy as well. Go ahead and get rid of that. And then I'm going to show things that are unique. I could also, by the way, show duplicate parameters, and apparently there are some things that are identical between the 2. But what I care about right now are those that are unique. So I'm going to go to unique. I'm isolating those in this shared parameter file. I've collapsed all of my groups over here to give me an easy copy process. And I'm going to take things like identity data stuff. And I'm going to drag and drop that from the right shared parameter file over to my left shared parameter file. And it'll copy them across, basically. I'm going to recollapse this because every time I drag things across, it expands to show me those parameters. And I really don't need that. So I'm just going to recollapse each time here. I'm going to take these materials, select all of those. This is in materials and finishes right now, which is good. I'm going to drag and drop that to materials and finishes over here. Recollapse. I'm going to go to other. These are a bunch of control parameters. Yeah, and appearance schedule, that's all good. I'm going to take and drag and drop these over into others, a good grouping. I think that'll be good. I'll drop them there. Phasing, I have an existing checkbox that I use for some of my stuff. I'll drop that into phasing. All right. So I've got all this now. It's all done. I think I dropped that into phasing. Let's find out. Let's go find things that are duplicates, exact duplicates. I did drop that into phasing, which is good. Okay. So I've got these things all copied across. This file is no longer needed. So ultimately, I should delete that file now. I've handled it. I'm done with it. I'm going to delete it so that nobody continues to work with that file. It would be gone. And I'm going to continue on with this file over here. In fact, I'm going to save this right now so I have this new file saved in place, and I'm going to use this when I go through my family repair process. Now, you could do this as many times as was needed. I could browse for another shared parameter file over here and take a look. I don't know what else I have here. This guy maybe? Yeah, there's nothing in there. Some of these are empty from previous demos, so I don't exactly know what I've got. So I would delete those when I'm done, right? Delete this guy, delete this guy. What about this guy? No, there's nothing in there either. So, oh, maybe I should show none. Yeah, okay, there we go. And we can delete that guy, right? So I can just go through and clean this stuff all up because I want my shared parameter directory ultimately to have one shared parameter file if possible. All right, so I've gone through the cleanup process. On the Manage Shared Parameter File tab, I've renamed some things, I've copied some things, either by using, renamed by using Find and Replace or double-click to modify things. It's really easy to go ahead and get your shared parameter file all configured the way you want. When you're done, you're done. That process can take you, you know, maybe an hour if you're being real picky about things. And that's about all it's going to take you, which I think is great. Okay, then it's time to go through and fix some stuff. Now, what do I need to fix? Well, let's just pretend for now that my schedule is already accurate the way that I want it. I'm going to use this schedule here, my door and frame schedule. And I'm going to use an architectural example for today, but any Revit family can be edited in this same exact way. Okay, I'm going to go to the door frame schedule, and you can see here that in some cases, my door and frame schedule has some blank rows of data, right? Not everything necessarily is blank. Like this guy is editable, it just has never been initialized, but some of these things here, they actually don't have the ability to have data entered into them because the parameter does not exist at all. It's just blank rows. This is what happens when a family that's in my schedule isn't configured to work with the schedule. So what are some of these parameters here? Let's pull this off to the side. We've got, okay, this column type. So door type, door material, door finish. There's frame type, frame material, frame finish. And it looks like those columns here for a lot of these doors, let's go back up to level 1. There we go. Yeah, all these guys here, these are all problematic. This one over here, this is fire rating. It's built in. I can actually type in whatever I'd really like for that. That's okay. I'm going to cancel that because I don't want to make that change. But all these here are parameters that I know are not working. On this door here specifically, these two doors with us, 142 and 143. I want to see where this door is. I want to see what it is and kind of where it is. So this is level 1. So I'm going to go to a level 1 floor plan where I can see this. Let's close hidden windows first. There we go. Level 1 floor plan. There they are. They're already highlighted because I had them selected in the schedule. So they're sitting up here. It looks like there's 2 double doors in my corridor. If I click on one of these guys, doors int double flush. Well, I can already tell you that's not my naming convention. That's not how I name my doors. And so obviously these are not mine. And if I expand this out, there's actually a few others. Doors bifold, doors int, let's see, doors opening, doors open arch, right? There's a couple of these that are problematic. So one of the tools I want to talk about here is the ability to quickly pull things out of your project. If you're doing this from a project point of view to correct stuff, you can pull this stuff out of your project. And it's very easy. From the CTC software tab, there's a tool here called Family Exporter. Now, I did this before today's demo, a little discussion here, but when I open up the Family Exporter, I have the ability to export entire categories of objects if I really care to. I could go in and pull out just the few that I know to be problematic here. You know, in this case, there's, 5 of them. And I could tell them where to be exported to. If I was doing just a single category like I am here, I have a folder called Exported Doors. I already dumped these out. I could tell it to organize however I want. In my case, I didn't want any extra organization. If I was going through and doing stuff like, exporting multiple categories of stuff where I got doors and I've got, casework and I've got, I don't know, windows or you name it, I could go and tell this to actually organize this out by like category if I wanted to. If they're all model categories, I just do by category. If I was dumping out maybe everything, right, taking an entire project and harvesting that, I could organize this out by like geometry and then categories. This is like annotation versus model, and then the categories underneath that. And I could dump all this out. I click export, go grab a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or, whatever your beverage of choice happens to be, a beer, whatever, and let this thing export for a little bit. And when you come back after about 5 minutes, it'll have saved all those families out of your project. In my case, I saved this out and it took it all of 10 seconds to get those 5 doors saved out. Anyway, once I have those saved out, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually edit this family from my project directly. I'm going to use this one family that I know to be problematic as sort of a template, a starting point, so I can make some decisions based on what's in here. And then I'm going to apply those changes to all of the other families, door families in this case, that I harvested. If your changes happen to be far more sweeping, where you're doing just some general changes like find width and replace it with width, right? That's real easy. I don't have to care about the category in that case. But this one here, I'm going to be caring about the category because I'm going to do some very specific changes to doors. And the nice thing here is I can save these changes, so if I have to make similar changes in the future, I can. So to do these changes here, I'm going to be using the tool Family Processor. But before I jump in, I want to show you the manual steps that you would normally go through in case you're not familiar with this. With this door, I would have to go into Family Types. And I'd have to know what it is I want to fix. Now, panel material finish, frame material, which apparently doesn't even exist here, they're all things that I would need to work with. And there's actually quite a few other parameters that I might want to take a look at as well. And so I can actually kind of standardize a lot of things. Swing angle, for example, that's currently an other. Well, I like that being in dimensions, and I like this being an instance parameter. So that might be something that I want to change as well in all of these doors, because clearly whoever made these in the first place doesn't follow my standard. So to make these changes manually, I would have to edit a parameter like swing angle. I'd have to, in this case it's family, I want to make a shared parameter, so I'd go select where this was. I'd want to make sure that I'm browsed to the correct shared parameter file, the one that I just fixed, which for me today happens to be on my desktop here in exported doors. Here's my shared parameter file. This is the backup. I'm going to delete it to remove any confusion. This is my shared parameter file. I would have to go in here and browse to where I have my dimensions, and there is angle, or what might be swing angle. Do I have that one specifically? Swing SW, to be in the W's, I suppose. Swing the angle. There we go. Browse and find that manually and click OK. Nope, sorry, that was in the other file. This is always the fun of dealing with shared parameter files and doing this manually. Dimensions, SW, swing angle, OK. I would want that to be an instance parameter, and I would want that grouped in dimensions. Scroll up, dimensions. There we go. Right? All of that is manual. And every parameter that I have to touch that doesn't work, that isn't configured the way that I want it to be, I have to go through this process every single time. That's not efficient, especially when I've got, in my case, 5 families. I can do this 5 times over for the same parameters over and over again. But there's a better way. And that's where the Family Processor comes into play. Now, I've opened up this family. This is my starting point. This is my first family that I'm going to use because it has all the wrong things in it. And I'm going to use it as a template to fix everything else. So I'm going to go through Family Processor. Give this thing a second to open. There we go. And I'm going to start with some brand new settings. So I'm going to clear out whatever might have been in here before, because this thing does remember my settings from session to session, and you will see this in a minute here. But I'm clearing all that out with brand new settings, and I get to start making choices of all of the things that I want to do for these families as I process them. And there's a lot more that I can do than what I just did for this one family, right? Here's an example. I may want to, when I'm opening up every one of those families, audit them. I don't know the source. This got dumped out of a project. It may have a bunch of trash in it. It may have some broken elements. It may be carrying some baggage along with it. I'm going to audit those families when I open them up and fix them, just to make sure everything is good to go. Now, if I'm working in Canada, or any place other than the United States, because the rest of the world is smart and we might not be the smartest all the time, I might want to have my units of all my content I might want to have all of the units in my family environment be all metric or be based on a certain kind of standard. And so if I have a family, it could be empty, but a family where I've configured everything to the exact units of measure that I want, I can process my families and tell my family, my door back here, to be configured exactly like this family down here. And it'll do that at the very end of all the processing. It'll make its units the correct units of measure. Length, duct size, electrical potential, right? Apparent power, like all the things that you might need to go through, airflow. It can change all those parameters by just using this one template family. It makes it real simple, okay? I'm not going to do that this time, but you could. After I do swapping of my parameters, I also like making sure my parameters are sorted by name. This is especially important in some of the pre-2019 environments. If you're in 2019 or later, it does a little bit of auto sorting, but still, I just like to guarantee my parameters are sorted by name within their appropriate groups, alphabetically. Now, you might want to sort of sub-modify that later, but this is kind of a good first pass, making sure everything is easy to find, all alphabetical, nice, neat. If you don't want to do that, don't check the box, right? No big deal. I'm not going to go through every setting here. I'm just going through the ones that I'm going to use today. Now, I didn't point this out, but whenever you harvest families from a project, you will always get a bunch of trash baggage that comes along with materials, right? Here's a whole bunch of stuff, that's in here. Now, some of these parameters I know that I'm going to be using in my door, but the vast majority of the stuff I'm not going to use. This is a door. Why in the world does Revit find it important to give me site earth? I don't know. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to take one step back, guys, because I got a question that showed up in the window, and I want to make sure I answer this right now. I was talking about this unit of measure right here, this template family. And there was a question that says, can it be in a higher version of Revit than what I'm in? The answer is no, it cannot. So you may want to manage this family in the oldest possible version of Revit you can, so that it can be used in all versions of Revit. It opens it up and uses that quickly to compare the units and then convert them, but it can only do that because it has to open it to scan it. It has to do that from an appropriate version of Revit. So if this template family is in 2016, I could use it in 2018, 19, 20, all the way up to 21. But if it was in Revit 2021, I couldn't be using it in Revit 2018. So you do want to make sure that you have a proper version of this family. I am fully aware that future versions of Revit have new units of measure or change units of measure. It was actually a pain in 2021.1 when they changed units of measure for us. But so you may need to have a couple of different versions depending on what your needs are. But by and large, most of the units can be handled with an older version for most of those that we care about, for 99% of the content. All right, back to change materials. With the change materials here, I am going to grab all materials, and I'm going to deselect the ones that I know that I want to keep in this family, and I'm going to keep selected the ones that I know that I pretty much don't ever use. So I'm going to scroll down here, exterior finish I know I need, glass, laminate, door handles I need. That's pretty much it. The rest of this stuff is all trash, and I don't want it, so I'm going to add it to my delete materials list, okay? You can choose to add materials if you need to. And I will be doing this in a minute here because I know this family pretty well. You'll be seeing exactly why I'm going to do this in a minute. But I can see here what my list of materials are going to be left in the family right now. Default is going to be left in here. Here's a pro tip for you, those of you who care about your materialization of your content. In the materials to change over here, I always personally take the default material, which is by default the sort of concrete colored gray, kind of generic material, and I take the red color for it in shaded view and the blue color in shaded view and make them both zeros, so it only has this sort of a greenish tone, a minty greenish tone. And I also make that transparent. Now, when this processes, while I'm within my family editor environment, I will see all materials that are default assigned to any solid geometry as this sort of glassy green color. If I see that, I can tell already materialization in my family has not been very well defined. Now, it may be assigned to a parameter, but that might not have been selected, right? I can see that very quickly, and I can make choices to correct that right here using this technique. Does this affect your actual project file at all? Not at all. Because when you load materials from a family into a project, if the name already exists in the destination project, it wins. So your default material in your project environment will stay the gray color, but in the family editor environment, it's going to be that greenish tone, which I think is fantastic. By the way, that also is meaningful when we're over here talking about units of measure. A lot of times our families are small, and in the US environment with imperial measurements, feet and inches, when I'm dealing with doors, I don't care about having 0 foot dash 0 and 1/8 of an inch on a thing, right? I want it to just say 1/8 of an inch. And so you can change your units of measure in the family, and that will have 0 impact on the projects into which they are loaded. So I often have my template family, if I'm dealing with imperial measurements, be in fractional inches, not feet and fractional inches. That's not always the case. Some content's better with, feet and fractional inches, but most of the time, inches is what I'm measuring in. Anything less than like 6 feet, I'm usually measuring in inches. So my personal choice is to do that. Those of you who are metric-based users, you're like, gosh, this imperial stuff is confusing. Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it. You're in metric. I'm happy for you. And jealous. Okay, let's get back over here to the discussion about changing other things in the family. So we just talked about deleting materials and changing materials. We're going to come back and talk about why I might want to add in a minute here. Let's jump over to the next tab, which is changing parameters. This is the tab that when I started this discussion about shared parameters, that I was kind of targeting in general here. We need to go through and fix all the stuff about this family as it relates to parameters. And there's a couple of steps we can do. We can delete things out that we know we don't need or can't use. We can add shared parameters. We can add family parameters if we need to for some control. We can replace parameters. This is the one that I was doing by hand in front of you. This is the super time consuming one, the money tab that most of us are really interested in. And I can also change parameters. I can move them around into different groups and I can do stuff with them. But let's start over here. There is actually a parameter that I've investigated in this family with and know that I need to change or delete. And that's this guy right here. Panel material in this family was defined as text. And so I'm going to delete that. I can't use it because I can't swap it for a real parameter that should be material. So I'm going to delete that parameter straight away. I also know that I need to add that parameter back in correctly. I'm going to add shared parameters here. I'm going to go up here and find, I have to browse the correct parameter file because I corrected this thing and it's on my desktop right now. I'm going to go to my desktop and go to, where is it? Exported doors. There it is. Okay. Shared parameters being browsed. Okay. It's got all my shared parameters in here with all my corrected stuff, and I'm going to look for panel material. Now, here's the nice thing. I do not have to scroll through and browse through a ton of different groups. I can simply type in the name of a parameter up here at the top, and it'll filter this entire list down of my shared parameter file, all couple thousand parameters, and it comes back with panel material that's a material type, and it's in the group of materials and finishes. So I can add that down below, right? There it is. Fantastic. Oh, and look at this. It already has a value, WD. You know what this thing did? It used this family as a template, and it picked up on the parameter that was in the panel material from before, the text value that was in there before, and it's trying to apply it here. Now, there's no material in my family right now that's called WD, so it's going to fail unless I give it a material called WD. Let's go do that to make sure that I can retain the data from a parameter that was a different data type. I'm going to retain that by making sure I have the right value here. I'm going to go over to Add Materials. I'm going to add a material called WD, add that down below. It doesn't matter what its definition is because it wasn't really in use before anyway. So I'm just going to add the parameter and let somebody else figure out what that's supposed to be. But for now, when this new parameter gets added, the material WD will exist because it will have been created and it can assign the value right away. And this is going to be grouped in materials and finishes. It's going to be a type parameter as my material parameters should be. That's ready to go. Let's go take a look over here. Anything else I need to delete? Nope, I think everything else is good. Yeah, my data types are all okay. I think we're okay for now. Let's go to, let's see, I think I'm done. Oh no, I need to add one more parameter. I have a parameter that I like putting in my family. It's called copyright. This also lets me tie into another part of the discussion here about your shared parameter file and the organization of it. I strongly suggest you use the same parameter groups that Revit has available. Shared Parameter Manager knows about those, and it can auto-generate them for you. And that's nice because then you can put your parameters in groups that Revit knows about. Why is that important? When you're in the family processor here, copyright, for me, is a text type of parameter. Now, if you've done a lot of family creation, you might know that text type parameters by default will go to one of two categories depending on the Revit version you are in. They will either go to other or they will go to text, neither of which is where I want this parameter to go. So my shared parameter file is almost like a parameter definition template for me. I've grouped it in identity data in my shared parameter file. Because identity data is a real group in Revit, in fact, you can see it right here in the parameters for this family. Because it's a real group in Revit, when I add this down below, family processor is smart enough to go, oh yeah, that's a real group, identity data, and it automatically assigns it to that. So I don't have to remember in the future to put it in the correct group, it's already there. I see a lot of parameter files that has parameters like width and height and thickness, and they put them indoors. And they're like, oh, but I need to use that in casework as well, and then they have to remember where to go find it. And put it in dimensions, that's where it's gonna get grouped in the family. And this helps me with that because it remembers where it was in the shared parameter file and it groups it there by default, which I think is fantastic. And I can also straight away set a formula here. CTC software 2021 or whatever I want to put in here, like you name it. You can put whatever copyright you want, set a formula if you want to, do all the things, or set an explicit value, whatever. Okay, I can choose to add family parameters as well. And y'all, I use this all the time just to see exactly in my family what are family parameters. These are all family parameters, and it's giving them to me that I could add back into my family again into other families if I wanted to with the same exact definition. I don't usually add family parameters myself. I use this as a quick list. I might screenshot this, and I use this on the next tab real quick, sometimes if I need to. Like base plate. This for me is actually threshold. It's a yes, no parameter. I want it to be threshold, but I don't want to make it as a family parameter. That's kind of silly. I want it to just be replaced if it finds it. So let's go to that tab. This is the one that most of us spend most of our time in. There was a couple of parameters that we were kind of talking about here. There was not panel material. Actually, I'm going to add that one by hand. Panel material as a material parameter. Material, there we go. Add that to my list because the panel material that was in this list was text and I can't swap that for my material. I'm just adding this. If it does find panel material in a family that's a material parameter, it will swap it correctly for my panel material just in case it gets found. There's a bunch of other parameters that were in here as well, right? There was frame finish. I want to make sure that's my frame finish. And notice how this thing automatically maps it. The names happen to be the same. The data types are the same. And so it reached into my shared parameter file. It found frame finish. It didn't make me go looking for it. It found it for me because the names are already the same. When that happens, it's a happy accident. I love it when that happens. It saves me time, right? There's others in here as well, I think, right? There was a panel finish, right? That one also, same thing. In fact, a lot of these, if I go grab frame depth, thickness, handle height, material, panel width, maybe even 1 and 2, swing angle, all these guys, if I add them to my list, the vast majority of those already exist in my shared parameter file by the same name, or at least a similar name, and I can then use that as sort of a starting point to go find things. Some of these like base plate, I know that one doesn't exist in my shared parameter file because I call it threshold, but this will limit my selection list from the entire shared parameter file down to just yes, no parameters. It's going to let me go find threshold very quickly because mine is a yes, no parameter. This saves me a lot of time. Trim depth, trim thickness, I think I have those two. Yep, I do. Some of these I don't really care about because they're not really a meaningful deal. Trim offset from face, I have no idea what that would be. Maybe this is trim width, maybe, if I have a trim width. Let's see what I got. Trim width. Yep, that's what I wanted. Okay, so trim width, right? So I can swap out their parameter for mine. I'm making this mapping one time, making it once. So once I've done this, again, if I was like, oh yeah, I don't remember exactly, oops, that scrolled. I don't remember exactly what I was looking for a thing. I can close Family Processor, and I can go look at something in the family over here, do something, look at what the data type was, look at what its data was, look at its formula, look at whatever I want to look at, and then I can go right back into Family Processor. Or if I wanted to use, say, the manual out-of-the-box shared parameter editing tool, if I really cared to do that, I could go to Manage, I could go to Shared Parameters, I could browse through that file, do all the things I need to do here manually, and then after I've done that, again, I can go back into either Shared Parameter Manager or Family Processor or whatever the step is that I needed. And when I go back into Family Processor, here's the cool thing. It remembered everything that I had already done. I checked on auditing. Oh, I forgot to leave these unchecked. Sort my parameters. It goes over here to materials and it remembers what I told it to delete and to add and to change. And I go to parameters and it remembers what I was deleting. If I was adding a shared parameter, all my settings, my formulas, it remembers all of the things. So when I'm in the middle of working, I can simply shut down and come right back into Family Processor on demand. Family parameters, changing parameters. Over here, parameters to change. This is fantastic as well. Sometimes if I have a parameter that already exists, like panel width 1, right? This has some kind of a formula on it. Maybe I want to fix that formula. Maybe I swapped out the name for EQ panels to panels are equal or are panels equal or something like that, and I want to fix my formula. I could come into here and I could swap out this and modify the formula here. What I really want to change, though, is this, right? I want to change the panel finish and frame finish. Panel finish. I want them both to be instance parameters. They're currently type parameters, and I want them to be instance parameters. I may want to add a formula. I may want to put them into a specific group, like swing angle, right? That one I wanted to move to a different group, and I wanted it to be an instance parameter. Set instance. Put this in the group of, what was that? Dimensions. That's where I like it. So I'm going to put it in dimensions. So I can set this, right? This is super simple to do. Set all my swing angles by default to 90 degrees in case some were coming in by default to 45 degrees. Real easy. You do have the ability here to control the processing order, the order in which these operations take place. If you need to move them around, you can feel free to move them around. Sometimes I like to add family parameters before I add my shared parameters. Sometimes I like to, I don't know, change something before I replace with something else. I don't know. You could do different things in this processing list. Totally up to you. Ultimately, when you're all done, I can select families and begin. And I can do this either on my current family file over here and begin just to test everything out, or I can process multiple files. I can browse out to where I've got all this stuff here on my desktop with the exported doors. I can grab all these things and tell them all to be processed in one step. In fact, let me shut this down and let me close out of this door so it's not actually open. I'm going to open up into a brand new empty family, just a generic model. Doesn't really matter what I pick. And I'm going to go back into Family Processor. This is important because it can't process a family that I already have open to open it and then save it. It has to be closed when I'm starting this process, but it remembers the fact that I've chosen all these. I can tell this to automatically save even if nothing was needed. I can save it to a different parent folder if I wanted to have the originals and then have some new stuff, or I'm upgrading content to a new library. I can do some preview overriding if I care to. In case I missed anything, I can automatically create a new shared parameter file from unique shared parameters that I didn't handle in that family. And then I could go through the process again if I needed to further clean by using Shared Parameter Manager to understand the differences, and then write some more steps in my Family Processor step list. A lot of things you can do. You can even create type catalogs, deleting your types from your families. You can tell it what to include or exclude. Like, all the things you can do here are super powerful. Ultimately, I'm going to click Begin Processing, and I'm going to let this thing rip through these families and just kind of see what it's about to do. It's going to give me a confirmation window here saying these are all the things I'm about to do. And when I click Continue, it's going to start the process of opening each family, making these changes, saving the family back as a compressed, compacted file with whatever new preview if I told it to do that. And it does this, you can see it happens very quickly. It's about 10, 15 seconds per family in my case, on average. Sometimes certain families take a little bit longer depending on what's going on inside of them. Most of the time, these families are just super quick, super easy to go through and process. You could start this when you go to lunch, and then when you're all done, it comes back and says, hey, look at all the things that I did. I did all of these things. There was an error here. Oh, it couldn't delete a material because it wasn't in the family. What? I didn't mean to delete that. Oops, I guess I added a thing that I didn't intend to add. My fault. That's okay. Or maybe it was trying to set a parameter on something, I don't know, whatever. But it went through and did all this stuff, and each time it was done, it says, I'm processing this, and after it's all done with the processing of that thing, it says it successfully saved it to whatever that name was doing a save as. So really simple tool set, well, not simple to set up, but simple to use once it's set up. And if you wanted to run this again and again, you could save these settings. So you could do things for doors, things for air terminals, things for lighting fixtures, you name it, all the things. Okay, final step in this process, now that I've done that, well, I probably would want to reload those back into my project. And I actually have a great tool for that, Family Loader, that'll let me load them back in. In my case, I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to talk about another tool, the final tool in the mix, called Schedule Parameter Resolver. So I'm going to shut out of this family. I guess it was 4 views open. I was waiting for it to refresh, and there was 4 views open there. I am going to do just a real quick insert load so I can reload that family, one of the families that I had saved out here to my desktop. Let's go grab this guy. We'll just do the one that I was working with for right now. Make it editable, overwrite that. This thing will now have all of the new stuff. You might even notice here that I've got in dimensions swing angle, and I've got frame finish and panel finish out here, ready to go. And in my type data over here, I now have something called threshold, right? And I've got a copyright, which has my formula put on there, CTC Software 21. It did all the things. It's ready to go. And I've got a real material called panel material, WD. It's actually a material. I can click on this. It'll open up the material editor, right? WD is a real material in here. It gave it to me. That's fantastic. Saved me some headache and time. All right. Now that I've got this, let's jump down to one of these schedules and see something that may have happened. Where's my schedule? There we go. Now, one of my schedules here, you might notice that my material finish, frame material, frame finish, they're not really quite all working. Maybe one of the things I did was I changed which shared parameter I was trying to reference. I processed through an entire library. That's fantastic. And after I process through all that, I've modified my parameter, I process my library, I load them back into my project, and now some of my schedules might be not showing all the same correct data, and that's because it was referencing an outdated parameter. I have to grab the correct parameter, but how do we do this manually? Let's show you the manual process. I'm going to fix this panel material parameter here in the door grouping. Let's see what happens. Fields, let's go for, so I have a panel, I have one called door material right now. That's the old one. Let's go find panel material. Panel material is a good one right there. We got panel material, and I could add that here across into the list, right? I'm going to pull this guy out. Now, if I had, say, frame, right? I've got frame materials and frame finishes as well. Well, I got a frame material here, and a frame material here, and a frame material here. And if I want that to be put in here, I don't know which one it is I actually want to grab. So what do? We grab all 3, and we add those all across into this frame material, and then maybe we pull the old one out or whatever. But when we do this, notice what happens when you insert a new parameter into a schedule that already has configured headers. First of all, the header name here doesn't know what it's supposed to do. So it just goes, oh, panel material. It uses the parameter name, which means I got to go and manually say MATL here by hand. But then my groupings are already screwed up. So I have to go in here and ungroup and regroup for door. And then the same thing holds true for frame. Now it looks like this one here is the frame material that I want to use. So I'd remove this one, ungroup, regroup, change the header. That's tedious, man. If I've got multiple projects to do this for, I do not want to play that game in multiple projects or even multiple schedules. So I'm going to undo that change. So we're back to the original schedule. Hang on, let's go back, undo. There we go. Back to my original schedule. And you might notice here that I've got other floors worth of these schedules. They're all broken in the same way. I don't want to have to go through all these and do that over and over again. This is where the schedule parameter resolver comes into play, okay? What this lets me do is reference a correct shared parameter file, which once again for me is on my desktop. This is the file that we made today. Here's my shared parameter file. With this shared parameter file, I'm going to pick my door schedules that I know to be problematic. Just checking the box here, it goes and grabs all the columns. Now, most of these columns I'm going to leave alone, but the one that's called door material, this guy, I'm fixing this one. This one's going to become panel material. Where is it at here? This is actually sourcing this list from my shared parameter file, panel material. And I got door finish, which is actually going to be panel finish right there. I've got a frame material, right? I think that one, yeah, frame material. This is going to become frame material, there we go. And finally, frame finish. As I click OK, this is going to rip through all of these schedules and say, hey, if I find that old door material, door finish, frame material, frame finish, swap it for the correct one. And when it swaps it, it keeps the header and it keeps the groupings. So I don't lose any of that. So that's completed. And as I close this out and this refreshes, hopefully this will have, I have the wrong parameter being referenced apparently by this. It looks a lot better when I reference the correct parameter. Obviously I didn't fix all my families. Give me a second, y'all. I'm gonna grab the right one here, I think, in a minute. We'll do this one more time on just the panel material schedule here. One of these should be right. Let's see here. Revit settings, shared parameters. It might be this guy. Let's try this again real quick. Panel material, swap for panel material. Let's see. There we go. Okay, yeah, so I was referencing the old file apparently. Oops. If I fix this for all these schedules here, once I just check the box, we'll just pretend like I already did all of them for the panel material, which it just swapped out for me. PA, panel. Apparently there's two different panel materials now in use in my schedule, so I just map this guy one more time. I want to make sure they're all using the right one, right? I'll do one other one. We'll just do frame material for the fun of it because we're here already. So FR, frame material, all of my schedules, click OK. It rips through all of them. They're all going to be updated. We'll see the frame material here update in a minute. Regenerates all my schedules. And if I jump over to like one of these schedules, okay, the panel material is still working as expected, right? And it does it for all of them based on that shared parameter file that I referenced. So as long as I have the right parameter, you can see the problem with having multiple shared parameter files. That's frustrating because you don't know exactly which one you're supposed to be using. That's why you're supposed to be using just one shared parameter file. All right. Let's see here. I think that's the entire workflow for today, right? We talked about fixing your shared parameter file, fixing your families, and fixing your schedules en masse very easily. So you can go through and change your mind on standards or get your standards in line and implement those standards very quickly with those 3 tools. So I'm going to come back and answer a couple of the questions I saw roll in a minute ago, but I want to talk about one more thing here real quick before we go into questions and answers, and that's if you don't already have this, how can you get it? Because I want you to be able to get your hands on this. Well, this is how you can get it. If you go to the website, ctcsoftware.com, our website, and you go to the products portion, you can go to the BIM Manager Suite. That's the suite that I primarily talked about today. And you can also see the batch suite and some other suites. But the BIM Manager Suite right here for 2021, you can try this tool set free for 14 days. You can do pretty much everything that I was doing today. You can also watch some of the demos. Of course, this recording is going up online here soon. But you can try this out and see if this is a meaningful tool set for you within your environment. Just get that trial, download it, try it out, and see if it's going to work. Have a fantastic day. We look forward to seeing you in the next CTC webinar.